The snow fell so heavily that night it erased sound itself, turning the forest into a silent, endless grave of white. Lieutenant Marcus Hale had seen war, chaos, and loss in places most people could never imagine, but nothing prepared him for the sight waiting ahead on that frozen trail. A woman bound against a tree, her head lowered in exhaustion, her uniform stiff with ice, and beside her, a loyal German shepherd refusing to leave her side even as the storm threatened to bury them both alive. In that moment, the mission he thought he was on no longer mattered. Something far more human had just begun. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of people helping people even in the darkest moments, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us why humanity still matters. Marcus had been traveling through the remote forest on a survival training exercise, expecting nothing more than cold winds and long hours of isolation. The storm had rolled in faster than forecasted, swallowing the path behind him and forcing him to rely on instinct more than direction. That instinct was what made him stop when he noticed movement through the trees, not the movement of danger but of desperation. The forest ranger, Emily Carter, had been missing for nearly 2 days after failing to report back from patrol. No one expected her to still be alive in conditions like this. Yet there she was, barely conscious, her face bruised and pale, rope cutting into her coat, her strength nearly gone. The dog, a trained K9 named Shadow, stood alert despite exhaustion, his body shielding her from the wind as if he understood that giving up meant losing her forever. Marcus moved quickly, cutting the rope with numb fingers while fighting the rising fear that he might already be too late. The storm intensified, snow collecting on their shoulders as minutes felt like hours. Emily's pulse was weak, her breathing shallow, and frostbite had already begun to claim her hands. Shadow watched every movement carefully, not with aggression but with cautious hope, as if trying to decide whether this stranger could be trusted. When Marcus finally wrapped Emily in his thermal blanket, the dog pressed closer, refusing to leave her side even for warmth. Loyalty like that was something Marcus understood deeply. It reminded him of the men he had served with, the unspoken promise that no one gets left behind. The journey back was brutal. Each step through knee-deep snow drained energy Marcus could barely spare. He carried Emily across his shoulders while Shadow guided them along the faint trail, the dog somehow sensing the safest direction through the storm. The cold gnawed at Marcus's muscles, and more than once he stumbled, nearly collapsing under the weight of exhaustion. But every time he faltered, he looked at Emily's frozen face and remembered why stopping was not an option. Survival was no longer about strength, it was about refusing to surrender. Hours later, when distant rescue lights finally pierced through the snow, Marcus felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, relief mixed with emotion he could not easily name. Emily survived, though recovery would take time. Doctors later said that another hour in the cold would have ended her life. Shadow never left the hospital entrance during those first days, waiting patiently until she was strong enough to walk again. The story spread quietly among the rescue teams, not as a tale of heroism, but as a reminder of how fragile life becomes when nature strips everything else away. For Marcus, the experience changed something deeper. He had spent years believing strength meant endurance and silence, pushing forward no matter the cost. But watching that dog refused to abandon its partner, and seeing Emily fight to survive despite impossible odds, reminded him that strength also meant connection, the willingness to care, to stop, and to help when no one else could. Sometimes the hardest battles were not fought in war zones, but in moments where compassion decided whether someone lived or disappeared unnoticed. If this story touched your heart in any way, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in hope, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Before the ending, we have one special request. Comment the word hope below if you believe that even in the coldest moments, kindness can still save a life. In the end, the storm passed, as all storms eventually do. The forest returned to silence, covering the tracks of that desperate night. But for 3 lives bound together by chance, a soldier, a ranger, and a loyal K9, the snow became more than a memory. It became proof that even when the world feels unbearable, one act of courage can change everything, and sometimes being found is the beginning of learning how to live again.